really cool about what's going on right now is people are learning how to get back to basics in terms of movement and strength and conditioning. And you have the one young man, and I highlighted him in a blog that I did.
Yes, you did. I saw that.
He must be a farm kid. Like he's getting, bricks or whatever it is. And it's this is awesome. So there should be no excuse for any youth sport coach to say, oh, we don't have access to a weight room. We can't do, strength and power development or whatever. I mean,
yeah, that young man's our punter. He's actually a really good punter. He's a Division I punter. And he has come up. He literally has gotten of a plow, the front loader of a plow. His parents had disconnected it. And he power cleans that up and down for his power clean movement. So it's pretty wild what some of our kids have come up with.
Yeah, great, good.
Tony is on, Joe, and so we got everybody here. It looks like Andy's on, Tony's on.
Yeah. Good morning, Andy. How are you?
Morning, team. Sorry about that. I was having some technical difficulties.
Yeah, you're okay. Good. Yeah. So we're gonna get started this morning. I want to welcome everybody. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Joe Eisenmann. I'll be moderating today's LTADchat live session. This is being recorded, and then it will be archived where people can go back and view. So just be mindful of your actions. If you have your camera on, if you want to turn your camera off, that's fine as well. The same with the mute. We also encourage you to use the chat box to ask any questions. I'll field those questions and then interject as we go along in today's discussion. And the focus today is going to be on developing the whole person. We're going to use lessons from the gridiron or American football. Along the way, we're also going to highlight the efforts of USA football in what they're doing with long-term athletic development and the football development model. It was actually through a previous position that I held at USA Football as the director of high performance and coach education, where I came to know today's guest, Andy Ryland from USA Football and Coach Mike Kirshner. For those that aren't familiar with USA Football and kind of more broadly the sports infrastructure in the United States, I'm just going to take a little time to explain some background because I think it's important. I feel a lot of people in the United States don't really have a good idea of our sport infrastructure. So the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee is the overall governing body of the sport in the country. And it consists of some 45 or so sport-specific governing bodies like USA Football, USA Basketball, USA Swimming, etc., that oversee their respective sport. Not all of these national governing bodies or NGBs are created equal, and some have more quote-unquote authority and mandating power than others, as the overall sport system in our country is something that I've described oftentimes as the wild, wild west. So if we use football as an example, we have several organizations that function, such as Pop Warner. Most people associate youth football with Pop Warner, but there's other organizations as well, like American Youth Football, AAU has football, and then there's others. But these organizations don't necessarily report up to USA Football. So today it's really great for me to reunite with Andy Ryland, as I mentioned, from USA Football. Andy and I worked side by side in the development of the long-term athletic development plan during my time at USA Football, and we travel across the country conducting several coach education workshops related to the implementation of LTAD in football. I really like what Andy has to offer in this space. He brings a really unique lens to developing athleticism and developing young football players from a real holistic standpoint. So he'll have a lot to offer the conversation. Andy was a linebacker at Penn State University, where he also received a bachelor's degree in movement science. So he has a great educational underpinning of movement. He also played rugby with USA Eagles. He's coached football. And now he served as a coach educator, coach developer at USA Football for 5+ years. It was during this time when I was at USA Football working with Andy that I was also introduced to Coach Kirshner. So Coach has been a staple in high school football, not only in his home state of Indiana, but also on the national stage. He is a very dynamic and powerful leader and speaker, and I think you're going to see that today. He's been coaching since 1990. That's 30 years. I think there might be a few people on here that might only be 30 years old. So just put that in context here. He has an incredible amount of experience teaching at Warren Central, Cascade High School, Ben Davis High School, which has been seen as a national power and a producer of many collegiate football players in our country. And now he is serving as the head coach at Mount Vernon in Indiana. So as I mentioned, he's well respected by his colleagues across the country for not only developing Division I players, winning state championships, but more so his ability to lead and mentor young people, which is going to be something that we talk about on the back end of this show. Probably the last third of the show, we're going to talk about that aspect. So again, today I want to focus on developing the whole person using lessons from American football. But again, I think a lot of the lessons and principles that we talk about today are going to transcend across sports and really the development of humans in general. So to get started, I actually want to share with everybody how Coach responded to me when I asked him to join LTADchat in a tweet. He responded and he said, "Sure, but I don't know what LTAD is." And that's so interesting, isn't it? Because here we are in this space, here we are oftentimes with a lot of people who join this conversation in an echo chamber. And, you know, Coach has been doing long-term athletic development for some time. And I want to start and ask Andy first. Andy, what does long-term athletic development mean to you?
Yeah, so first off, Joe, appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for the kind words. I cherish those car rides for that summer. I think we traveled something like 9 out of 12 weekends in a row, driving all over the country, and we definitely got to pick each other's brains and chat a bit. So I may be biased again because I have enough kind of formal studies to be dangerous, but I like to kind of put it in coach's terms because we need to make it actionable. And so I try to explain to people, and I use words they're familiar with because a lot of our coaches do come from the educational side. So it's curriculum guidance kind of on engaging and developing athletes appropriately for their age. And the reason why I choose those terms, and you know me, I like my wordplay a bit, but it is a curriculum because we're trying to structure some things, but it's curriculum guidance. We all know as a regular teacher, you have a bell curve, and you're going to have a bell curve in development. I think some of the people that are against some of these models are always saying the specialization or the individualization gets lost in the model. Well, it's curriculum guidance. It's giving us a starting point, but there's an art and a science to coaching. So we're going to have to move up for our early matures or our great athletes, and we'll have to regress a bit for those others. But we want to provide some curriculum guidance so we're doing things appropriately for the age and the stage. And then it's about engaging because if we don't get athletes to develop an intrinsic motivation, have the sports be fun, have the sports be entertaining, to have the sports be meaningful, and you could say the same about physical education, I'm sure, then we're going to lose them, right? It has to be a fulfilling event for them. And something as simple as educating on maybe the cognitive aspects of youth needing task-focused drills because they conceptually can't understand doing X is going to make them better at Y. So we better make X a goal unto itself, and we're going to compete this fun drill, and then they're going to try really hard and get a lot of great development. It's engaging them so that they can be developed to the maximum of whatever their potential is. So I kind of float with that definition, that it's curriculum guidance for engaging, developing athletes based on their age and their needs.
Yeah, great, Andy. That's all great stuff. So Coach, one time when I heard you speak and we had a conversation, you were describing to me this feeder program that you operate to develop young people, young football players. So can you explain to us a little bit about that feeder program?
Sure. I'm going to back up just a little bit. First of all, thanks for the introduction. Next fall will actually be my 37th year. I spent 6 years, and this was the beginning of my coaching career as a youth football coach, which kind of leads me a little bit to my understanding of the importance of youth coaching and my side of youth coaching, and then what I took when I actually became a high school football coach and then a high school head coach. I believe that the whole purpose of youth football or youth sports in general, because I have coached youth basketball, boys and girls. I've been a high school girls coach in basketball, high school softball coach, youth softball coach, youth baseball coach, high school baseball coach. So I've coached a variety of sports at all levels. And there's an unbelievable value that we're missing in the connection between the youth and the high school. And couple of things I do, and I sat there and wrote this up. I have your typical, like most schools, I have a summer youth camp. I don't charge my kids for youth camp. I am not into making money off my own kids in my own programs, in my own townships, or wherever I'm coaching. I've never been that way. It's not something I want to do. Our summer one is very good. Youth coaches all come and work it with us. We do it at a time block when the youth coaches could be there. And I don't have the youth coaches stand there. The youth coaches have to instruct. I want the youth coaches, I want to hear what the youth coach is saying. So when they're talking about ripping up on the bag for a tackle, I want to hear them say that. Because if I don't hear it, then I know it's not what I'm getting on the field when they're doing it. So we have a youth summer camp. I sit on the youth league board. All right, so all youth league board meetings I attend, okay, which I did that when I was at Ben Davis. I did that when I was at Cascade, Warren, and now at Mount Vernon, because I want to know the decisions they're making. Are they player-driven? Are they player-driven decisions? If they're not, then it's probably not a good decision. I tell my youth coaches every year, I don't care how many games you win. I care about how many kids come back. If there's not a retention of kids, again, you're going to lose some just don't like it. It's not for them, but there needs to be a major retention of kids. And we actually track the number of kids who come back from, say, from 4th grade to 5th grade or 5th grade to 6th grade. And then the one thing they were referring to, I started this about 7-8 years ago. I offer a free winter football academy. That's what we call it. So for 1 hour, there's an O-line, D-line academy. And then for another hour, there's an all football skill players academy. It's free. It's open to all grades. I don't care what kids come from what schools. We get kids from multiple schools. I don't care. I don't want anything from anybody. When I first started it at Ben Davis, we did it just with quarterbacks, and then we expanded it. But on a given night at Ben Davis, we were getting anywhere from 250 to 300 kids in our indoor facility. I go to Mount Vernon 2 years ago, and the first time I did it, I was getting about 35 kids. Last year, we had 175 kids. So it has expanded. We do it one night a week because I know they've got schoolwork. I know they're in basketball season. We do it one night a week. We work on fundamentals, but Andy will really appreciate this. We finish every academy workout with the tackling station, where we're buzzing our feet, squeezing, ripping. We got the bags, we got lines going. We're using all the same terms. And so every kid, whether you're a lineman, a quarterback, every kid finishes every academy learning how to tackle, proper footwork, base, getting the head to the side, all that. What's that? Okay. We also, to keep this going, we started I lose somebody? We started, when I got to Mount Vernon, because of the proximity of our schools, we actually have weight training and agilities. And I'm going to back up what I say on the weight training here in a minute. For 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, running every Tuesday, Thursday, starting in December. My season ends in November. We start in December, and we go December, January, February, March, April, May. All right. Is there something wrong?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have to record this and my dogs are going crazy right now. I apologize.
Oh, you're all right. My dogs will be here shortly.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You're good. So we lift, and we lift 2 days a week. We have middle school coaches bring them over after school to our weight room. While the varsity kids, my older high school kids, are lifting, the young kids go out and do a series of agilities and movements, dynamic warm-ups, lunge walks, side lunges. We're trying to get them to bend their knees and do what we just call functional movement, getting young kids to be able to bend correctly. We do all kinds of simple footwork drills. We bought all these $1 like mini hula hoops where they're stepping in and out, and bags, and we got stations for all the kids, and we get all that done. Then when the varsity kids are done lifting, they go in the hallway to work on functional movement, and the young kids come in and lift. And when I say lifting, I'm not talking about putting bars on our backs. We're working on goblet squats, all right? Just putting a 5-pound weight here and working on, again, learning to bend our knees correctly and doing the movement correctly, all right? Because we're not worried about how much weight they all want to come in and max out, and we don't do any of that, okay? We don't do any of that. We don't even talk about it with their young kids. We're all concerned about getting our movement. So we do that. And then in the spring, the last thing I do in the spring to keep my numbers up is we have a spring camp that goes, so we lift on Tuesday, Thursday, then right after that in the spring, in April and May, we go straight out to the field with the young kids. Middle school coaches there, some of the youth coaches help, and we're back to fundamentals. We're back to tackling. We're now installing an offense and defense so the middle school coaches can hear it. And then we also do a spring 7-on-7 league, helmets only, all right, where we travel with other schools and we play 7-on-7. The thing I find was ironic, and I think I kind of offended the 3 other schools that are in this little round robin, is they charge their kids $50 a kid to play. And they're like, how'd you get 60 kids to do this? I said, because I don't charge my kids a dime. I hand them a helmet, I hand them a mouthpiece, I give them a jersey, and I say, let's go play. All right, because I want my kids to have fun, and we have fun. We take them for ice cream afterwards, things like that. We have a good time. We involve the parents. And so my vision of a feeder program is to get as many people involved kid-wise at as early an age as I possibly can. The Winter Academy has been huge for me. Parents get to come in and sit and watch in the gym. It's in the evenings. If I was a basketball coach, I would do the same thing. I would have a spring basketball academy, something like that. I would do something if I was coaching more than just football, and I've coached almost every sport. I would do something very similar. So, Joe, that's kind of where I was at with the feeder program. I hope that's what you wanted.
Coach, everybody needs to hear that. Not just football coaches across this country, but anybody who runs a youth/high school program. And you made the point really early on in your discussion there about this disconnect between youth and high school. And we see that so much. I have a follow-up question, but I want to get Andy in here as well, because Andy's just sitting there as you're talking, just nod. But Andy, let's get into the USA football development model, and in terms of what Coach just described. How does that align with USA football's football development model? And maybe, just give a little bit of background on the football development model. I'm going to drop a link in the chat box as well for people. But yeah, go ahead and go down that road for us.
Yeah, so those on the call that are familiar with the USOPC's American Development Model, the ADM, and then they kind of put out the call to all the NGBs that they wanted their sports to come up with a model because they knew there was going to be differences in the sport. I think we, just conceptually, the time for high achievement in women's gymnastics, we'll say, is a different timetable than maybe American football. So they wanted to allow some flexibility in the sport. And so FDM, or the football development model, is USA Football's version of long-term athlete program based on the same USOPC pillars, and then addressing some specific needs for football. So what's interesting, and some of the reasons I were nodding, is one of our core principles is entry points and options, in that football traditionally has been American football as we know it, right? Block, tackle, run, catch, 100-yard fields. I always think it's funny that we have 8-year-olds playing on the same size field as an NFL player. Like, football is the only sport in which we would have our youngsters playing on an international size field or pitch, right? Other sports have started to adjust. Soccer, in basketball, you may play half court. You have the hoop extenders. We have T-ball. We have coach pitch. We have player pitch. The field gets bigger every year, on and on and on. And football hasn't had that. So we are big on entry points and options. We offer some modified game types, some limited contact game types, proponents of flag as ways to just keep people involved in our sport. Flag football is often seen as and said flag. People don't say flag football. It's almost like they consider it separate. So we just want people engaged in our sport. And what Coach was talking, he was just, preaching kind of this, as a high school coach, here's how we offer entry points and options. Here's how we offer opportunities for kids in our community to have a great experience, to fall in love, or to learn some skills in the game of football. And that's, I think, how we build kind of this desire to want to play. Maybe it's someone who's interested in playing, and maybe it's the parents who are unsure. But you know what? We go to this winter academy, we run around, we learn some skills, we have a great time, and now everyone in the family says, you know what? Let's give football a shot. Like, I'm sure that's a common conversation that happens with people that are on the fence. They 7-on-7 competitively, playing, a skills-based winter academy, having the training blocks, and again, being, looking at age-appropriate stuff and not trying to rush to the professionalization of these young kids. It just speaks to so many of the things that we believe that, throughout the course of the year, you're going to have multiple ways to engage with our program, multiple ways to learn about the great game of football, multiple ways to fall in love with football. Plus, knowing Coach, I know he's doing a great job with the character development stuff. I think anyone listening kind of hears the passion in his voice and can't help but get fired up about it. Knowing him personally, I know that is a true area of strength. We're doing a great job with the physical side of it, doing a great job with the skill side of it, in the winter academy, and then in the spring, addressing the tactical side. So he's addressing all 4 coactives. He's giving multiple entry points. And then the big thing was for, I know money is always a challenge at these programs, but to find ways, whether it's, sponsors or the Booster Club or whatever, but to keep it free. Let's not kid ourselves that money is increasingly becoming a barrier to sports, especially in the club-based system of so many other sports. And so I just think it's awesome.
Thanks for that, Andy. And again, in the chat box, I dropped the link to the football development model. Coach, I want to get to a question that somebody on the call today has. But one thing that we like to talk a lot about is implementation. So we have these plans, right? We have these fancy websites and fancy brochures with the model on it. But you've gotten your community now on a couple of occasions to implement it. And a big part of implementation is buy-in. So, and leadership. And you clearly show the leadership, like go into the youth meetings. But with coaches, how do you get buy-in from the coaches to put in all this additional time outside the season?
Great question, because there is a balance. Do I demand my coaches be at everything? No. Do I demand myself to be at everything? And the answer is yes. It's not an ego thing. I'm kind of the face of the program. To back up the whole numbers thing here just briefly, when I got to Mount Vernon 2 years ago, in 17, they finished the season with 40 kids. We have grown it from 40 to this fall, we'll have 120. The school hasn't grown at all, but our program has gone from 40 to 120 kids. At Ben Davis, and I know you guys have heard me talk, we ran about 240 kids, 9 through 12 in the program. And a lot of kids can't help me win. And you think, well, I used to get the question all the time, why do you keep those kids? My last year at Ben Davis, we went 14-0, ranked nationally, had a great year, one of the greatest teams ever in the history of the school. I had 54 seniors. Obviously, they weren't all playing. They identified with something in the program that made them want to be part of something that had nothing to do with playing. I'm in the process of building programs, I learned a long time ago, and I know Joe and Andy have heard me talk about this. It took me a major event in my life to make me realize I was in it for all the wrong reasons. I coached like everybody else. I coached hard. I demanded. Our practices were physically demanding. And I pushed because it was all about winning the next game and getting the next big job. And then in 2011, something happened that I missed the point. I missed the point of sports, which I'm sure they're going to get to later. But we as coaches, we as people in the community, I've gone the other extreme to where I involve my parents. My parents are invited to watch practice. My parents are invited to come and sit and watch the academies at night. I have no fear of a parent watching me coach. Now, do I yell at their kids? Yeah. And I have rules. I have boundaries. You don't get to talk to me or my coaches before practice or after practice, before a game or after a game, because emotions are high. But any other time, I'm free to come talk to. All right. But getting buy-in is really simple. All right. You offer an opportunity for a person to be the best person they can be. All right. That's why I don't charge anything. I'm not in the business of making money off kids. And that kind of happened because things were going at Ben Davis. We were kind of a poverty-ridden area a little bit. The average median income of a family of 4 at Ben Davis was $35,000. I was there 18 years. And so as kind of a need of getting kids connected to something in a situation where the environment maybe is not beneficial for them. It's a bad environment, drug homes, violence, whatever you might see. Those were and football was a way of inviting them in and giving them something positive to hold on for their lives. And I can share stories with that later on about the number of kids that have come back to me. I'll share one. I got a young man who works for UPS. Hadn't talked to him about 3 or 4 years. Real quick, his name is Corey, and he was a troubled kid and a troubled kid to coach. If you've done any coaching, he was the kind of kid you want to pop upside the head once in a while and say, just do what I tell you, would you? And his going into senior year, we thought he'd be a pretty good player. First week of practice, he doesn't show up. We don't know where he's at. We finally find him. He's living in another house. He's been kicked out of his home. Long story short, he shows up in my office a few years ago, and we're just catching up. He's got a wife. He's got a kid. He's working for UPS. And all of a sudden, he just starts crying, big tears coming down his cheeks. Said, "What's the matter?" He looks at me and goes, "You saved my life. That house you took me out of was a drug house." I go, "I knew where I was at. I knew I didn't want to be there." He goes, "If I'd have stayed there, I would have been them." He goes, "Because we made him move in with a coach." But you asked about coaches buy-in. I'm very cognizant of the coaches with their families. Very cognizant of that. I got coaches that coach other sports. Go have fun. All right. If a coach tells me, "Look, I got family this weekend. I can't make it for the summer camp." Great, go. We'll adjust because their mental health is important as mine and my players. All right. We sometimes I know the standard catchphrase, we got to keep grinding. Come on now, let's be smart here. I would never go back to the days as a football coach where I was practicing 2 and 3 times a day. I would never do that. Now that I'm down to 1 a day, even during fall camp, I go 1 a day. Guess what? I still get it done. It doesn't matter. We still get it done. This idea that we got to go out there and pound them and have live-in camps, practice 6-7 hours a day and beat them up. We were wrong. More is not better. How you do it is better. So there you go. Sorry, I got winded.
No, you're good. That's all great stuff, Coach. And we will certainly get back to some of those stories, and how you really coach the whole person in a little bit of time here. But Andy, I want to ask you a question here, because you alluded to the 4 coactives, or the 4 domains of performance, and you write and you talk a lot about how you intertwine physical development with the tactical and the technical elements of the sport. And specifically, you're an expert in contact skills and especially tackling, but we can assume that this can be expanded to other sport skills as well. Can you just talk a little bit about what you mean by that overlap, that interplay between the physical domain with the technical and tactical?
Yeah, so if you try to reverse engineer football, like any sport, right, your tactics, your scheme, your playbook is ultimately made up of 11 techniques. You're asking each of the 11 players to execute a task, do a job, use this skill. Those skills are underpinned by physical abilities. And so if players can't do something from the technical coactive, and that's part of your tactical coactive, you're not going to be a very good team. You're going to struggle there. And sometimes the reason players can't do a technical skill is a physical deficiency, or maybe a cognitive deficiency. They're having trouble learning it. Because of my background, I do tend to spend more time on the physical side, but the physical abilities are really the underpinnings of technical skills. And one of the things that I always tell coaches is that, especially with youngsters and even with high schoolers who are still developing, it doesn't matter what your coaching cue is if the part of what you're asking them to do, they're physically incapable of. If they don't have the mobility or the strength to hold a particular position, you have the best coaching cues in the world. That's unreachable for them. I was having a conversation just the other day with some strength and conditioning coaches at a Division I university, but about the same topic, like the ability to kind of separate, dissociate our bodies, right? And so we look at, say, blocking, for instance, where I'm trying to keep my core, my trunk incredibly rigid and strong because I'm in this combative situation and I need to transfer all this power. Yet as I'm doing this, like, I'm accurately and with all this great dexterity trying to put my hands in the right place, and simultaneously I'm trying to create as much power and leg drive as I possibly can. If I don't have some coordination base, some spatial awareness, some dissociation abilities, that's going to be a really hard skill for me to master. It doesn't matter what the coaches are saying. It doesn't matter how good your technical model is and what famous coaches' videos you watched on YouTube, right? If I'm struggling with dissociation, being able to do these skills is going to be very difficult. The strength requirements and the postures and positions we ask people to hold in football. Well, if I'm struggling in those areas, like I said, we can say flat back, neutral spine, all you want. If we're lacking those strengths, or we lack spatial awareness of where we're putting ourselves, we're going to go into contact in bad situations. And then you just go on down the line. I think, one of the classics, if you've ever watched a youngster throw a football, it's not, the technical model perfect motion. They tend to be kind of really in tight with their elbow. And my estimation is they have these little tiny hands. They can't hold a ball, so they cup it. They put their forearm underneath it so they can balance it. And then they're going to have this elbow tight to the ribs because they're staying underneath it. So it doesn't matter that you're showing them videos of Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady. Physically, that's where they're at, even with maybe an age-appropriate ball. So I think if coaches understand that physical skills underpin the technical skills, maybe, and my hope is that we would get coaches that spend enough time on the practice field developing the physical qualities in their athletes is instead of just going so sports specific, so technical. You've heard me say this a ton, but developing the athlete is an investment in the sports skill. If I am well balanced, if I'm coordinated, if I have speed and power, insert XYZ, I'm going to be able to execute the skill with balance, strength, power, coordination. And so we need to make sure that our coaches are spending the appropriate time in a good dynamic warm-up. We advise, as part of the football development model, that every coach includes an athlete development period in the practice. So after your dynamic warm-up, maybe it's 5 or 10 minutes, depending on the day. And we're going to pick a theme for that day, change of direction, speed development, acceleration, my area, prep for contact. And we maybe do some crawling and grappling drills. But we're going to make sure that every day we hit the field, instead of being in a rush for skill and scheme, we're developing the athlete who is capable of learning those other things and can actually do it. It's not all technique. That's built on building blocks. And then, you just go up and down the line as far as, the cognitive approach on how we teach it, or learning challenges that can make particular skills or difficult. So it is all intertwined. It is all kind of, this one big mishmash. Putting it in the coactives makes it easy for us to teach and understand. But the reality is, if we're not continually going back and forth as a coach, we're going to struggle.
Yeah, great stuff, Andy. I'm going to get back to coach here because we have about 15, 20 minutes left. And one part of the show that I really wanted to get at today around developing the whole person, with some of coach's stuff, that I've heard before, when you talk about developing psychological, social aspects like confidence and character, but also leadership qualities and followership in young people. Coach, enlighten us how you basically go about developing good people.
Before we got to understand a little bit about where our kids come from, and in order to develop leadership, in order to develop relationship things, we have to understand who we're coaching and who we're working with, whatever the sport may be. The school I'm at now is a little different. Did an FCA huddle Zoom meeting yesterday, and the school I'm at it's somewhat affluent, but you never know who you're reaching. So I do this FCA Zoom meeting, and I get an email from this young lady immediately after saying that she is living in a foster home. She was supposed to be placed on the 16th of March. The virus broke out. She's stuck in the foster home. She's depressed. She plays multiple sports. She can't get out and do sports. There's no basketball. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, I'm in a different school than what I was at, but there's still that guidance and that leadership that's needed. I'm going to share some interesting stats with the folks on here, something to think about, and then I'll get into what the question was. In the United States of America, 6,000 teens become alcoholics every day. All right, 3 million teens are problem drinkers. 13 teens on average commit suicide every day in the United States. The United States, wealthiest country in the world, and we're losing 13 teens every day. 1 million teens attempt suicide each year in the United States. That's 5,400 kids per day on average. And here was an interesting stat. And since I last talked to Andy and Joe about this, these are some interesting things I've been researching. Of those 1 million attempted suicides, 65% of those kids were from fatherless homes. All right. And then I start digging into the research on leadership and what you're doing. I start doing even more work in it. Then it goes even deeper. 7,000 teens drop out of high school every day. 71% of them are from fatherless homes. There's no father in the home. All right. So how do we develop leadership and how do we develop relationships when we're dealing with situations where there's no fathers in the home? most kids are being raised by mothers who are working multiple jobs, trying to make ends meet. They have multiple siblings. We have social issues in our society, as we know, that make it tough. So the development of leadership becomes really important. If a teenager has seen 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, this leads to what we call toxic stress. All right. At Ben Davis, I had numerous kids live in toxic stress. And I'm going to share a quick story about one particular family. The dad was a known drug dealer. In 2000, I got to think here, in 2015, you've seen this on your crime shows. This was a legitimate deal. They blew the front door open. My players were inside the house with their dad. The dad comes out of the back room. I know all this for a fact because the cops brought me over to help deal with the boys. The dad's sitting on a chair with handcuffs behind his head. They pull out all kinds of drugs, all kinds of AK-47s out of the house. This is the house the kids are living in. All right. And the players are really good football players. One ended up being an all Big Ten football player, and the other one I'll get to in a minute. So if you're living in a place that has violence, crimes, drugs, or poverty or abuse, you're 7% more likely to become an alcoholic, 12% more likely to become a drug user, 14% more likely to commit suicide. And in the U.S. today, 1 in 10 children are in danger in their own home. And with our current situation, that's probably amplified, all right, because of the situation we're in where we can't get out, we're quarantined, whatever it is. For a teenager to live in toxic stress, they're living in a mode of fight or flight. That's the world they live in, fight or flight, all right? I speak to police academies all over the Midwest twice a year on leadership, and this is the things I talk about. And when the police are talking to me, they're saying, how do we get past that we're the bad guy mode? Well, the reality of it is it's tough because when you come across a teenager that's in trouble, they're already in a fight and flight mode. And the science tells us that it takes 18 minutes for the bad brain to relax and the good brain to react. All right. I always tell the police officer, if you could take the kid on a walk and exercise him, the importance of exercise gets that toxic brain to relax and allows the rational brain to kick in where you can have a conversation about what is going on. I have been on numerous police runs where they have literally called me and said, Mike, we got your kids. They say they're Ben Davis kids. We need your help. And I get in my car and I go help. Here's what leadership does. I have leadership meetings monthly, sometimes every other week in my house. All right. Those leadership meetings are very open meetings. I used to do the whole John Wooden pyramid assess. All that's good. All that's good. But what I found out was if you really want to build leadership, you have to get that person, that player, to tell you about them. Because the old saying, and I know everybody on here has heard this, it's they don't care what you know till they know how much you care. We've all heard it, but it's true. It's absolutely positively true. And I alluded to this earlier. In 2011, I had a coaching revelation. I had gone down to the National Football Convention in San Antonio, and I listened, and there's the keynote speaker, and I can't even remember the big-time coach who was up there. I want to say Mark D'Antonio, and there's about 7,000 coaches in the auditorium listening to him talk. When he was done, the next topic was social issues, some of the things I just talked about. And of those 7,000 coaches, there was only 300 of us that stayed. Everybody else decided having a beer was more important. All right. I stayed. It was Bobby Bowden and Jim Tomei. Jim Tomei has since passed away. And they talked about social issues. And in this short talk, they said, do you ever, Bobby Bowden said he does this. He gets his seniors together. They get in a circle, has dinner, and each kid tells their life story. Now, these are 21, 22-year-old kids. And I thought, I wonder what it would look like at the high school level for me to get these kids in my house and high school kids share their life story. But I'm thinking to myself, my own stupid little ego, I already know my kids. They play football for me. I know them. They do what I tell them because I'm the head football coach and I'm the person in control. All right. Bad thing on my part. So I came back from that into January, had my next leadership meeting. Kids came over. My wife feeds them dinner. They're playing video games in my house. They're having a good time. Everything's great. I said, all right, circle your chairs up. They circle their chairs up. They think they're going to get their pens and pencils out, and they're going to write down leadership phrases and all that. I said, so no, tonight we're going to do something different. We're each going to tell each other our life story. Bobby Bowden said, when you do this, don't interrupt them. Don't talk, don't speak. So I said, who wants to go first? And I got the typical high school, just like I was in my econ class, and I said, who knows the answer to this, to Keynesian theory of economics? Nobody will raise their hands. They all put their heads down because they don't want to be called upon. If you're in a classroom, you know what I'm talking about. All right. So I said, all right, fine, I'll go first. I told him my life story, and it wasn't all perfect. I told about being brought home by the police when I was in the 7th grade, and how I guess you're not allowed to tear the insulation off an apartment building that's being built and use it to make a raft. You're not allowed to do that. So I got in trouble. I told him good things and bad things. But I opened myself up, which is something I had never done before. I'd never opened myself up to my players. I'd always kind of been taught that player coach, there's a wall a little bit between us. All right. You do what I tell you because I'm the coach and I know what's going on. I then turned to my right, and there's a young man by the name of Anthony. Anthony now lives in California, married, father of 2, and he's a fireman in California. And Anthony I knew really well because he lived 4 houses away from me. I knew Anthony really well. And he starts to talk, and he says, he's talking about his mom and his dad and his family, and everything's really good. And all of a sudden, he becomes very emotional. And he goes, Coach, I don't get to see my family. I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, you see, my dad's black and my mom's white, and our families do not believe in interracial marriages. All of a sudden, without speaking, I'm thinking, I don't know this young man sitting next to me who comes to my house and plays basketball every weekend. We go around the room, and kids are telling good stories and bad stories. My wife is now in the kitchen, emotionally a mess, crying. She can't stop crying because the story, she wants to go hug him. She wants to go hug him. All of a sudden, we get to Lamont, and Lamont's doing okay. Lamont's had some issues, but he's doing okay. And Lamont rolls his sleeves up. I know it's tough for you to see, but he rolls his sleeves of his wrist up. And I'm like, thinking to myself, what's he doing? And all of a sudden he puts his wrist out for everybody to see. And he says, you see these, Coach? These are where I tried to kill myself. And he's got nasty scars across his wrist. I'm thinking, what are you doing? I don't know my players. Now I'm becoming emotionally a mess because I'm realizing for the first time in my coaching career, and I've been coaching since '84, that I am clueless about relationships and leadership. I am completely, I've read all the books, I've done all the studies, but I am clueless as a person. All right. We get around the room and we get to the last young man. His name is Michael. And Michael is crying. And if you ever seen that a young man, he's crying. The tears are really big. The snot's coming out of his nose, and he's grabbing his head. He's grabbing his head and he's screaming. He goes, Coach, tell me I'm not crazy. Now, I've been silent now for 2 hours. For 2 hours, I have not spoken. And he is grabbing his head and he's becoming hysterical. And finally, I said, Michael, you're not crazy. Who says you're crazy? He goes, Coach, I go to therapy every week. See, when I was younger, my mama got beat up by her boyfriend, and I swore if I ever saw him again, I'd fix it. In the 7th grade, I was walking home from Chapel Hill across the street to my apartment, and I saw the guy. I saw him in the strip mall. I ran to my apartment, and I got a bat, and I ran over, and I beat him, and I beat him really bad. And he looks at me with those big brown eyes and the tears coming out of his eyes, and he says, Coach, please tell me I'm not crazy. All right. Michael did not have a good experience. Michael lost a full ride scholarship at Western Michigan. He's now in prison in California. It didn't work out well for Michael emotionally, physically. But when that night was over, I realized that I was coaching to win games. I was not coaching to win the hearts of people. And I went on a mission with my staff, and I told my staff, this is what we're going to do. We're going to hug them. We're going to love them. We're going to open our hearts up to them. We're going to invite them in our homes. I started a food bank to make sure my kids were getting food. I had money sitting out openly on my desk in my office where they could come get, if they had to take the Metro bus home at night, where they could just grab the money and go. No questions. I never asked them why they were coming to get the money. They were getting money. Food was piled up in my office, refrigerator in my office. They could come get whatever they wanted when they wanted. We started winning the hearts, and amazing thing happened. And not that we weren't winning it, Ben Davis, but we won really big from that point on. We won massive championships. The number of kids who wanted to be part of our program, who could never help us, wanted to be part of that because they could feel the love. They knew we cared. Not that we didn't demand things from them on the field. We demanded. I'm a very demanding coach, all right? But at the end of the day, I'm going to hug them and I'm going to love them. And when you do that, you develop leadership in them because they now have been given permission to do the same. Because when you open your heart up, they'll open their heart up, and the leadership is taken over. I now do the same thing at Mount Vernon. Different kind of kid, different kind of social economic kid, but they still need to be loved. It really doesn't matter where you're at or what you're doing with them. So that's my take on leadership. I do lots of reading. If I had recommendations for reading material, the book Lead for God's Sake is unbelievable. Andy Andrews, The Traveler's Gift, is phenomenal. All right. These guys do an unbelievable job getting us to think outside the box and think about everything in a relationship and relational situation. So, Joe, that's my take a little bit. If you want to add to that, I'm gonna step up just for a second. I gotta let a dog out real quick.
Just something I gotta throw in there, and this is something that we've been preaching here as part of the football development model, is that what I love about Coach, and I think everybody on this call and everybody who watches this webinar will know why we hold him in such high regard, Joe and I. But one of the great myths is that sport teaches all these great character traits, and that's a complete lie. Coaches, deliberate coaches, use sport to teach character traits. And if we're not intentional as coaches about it, the sport itself, sacrifice, discipline, being something bigger than yourself, blah, 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 it doesn't happen by magic. It takes an intentional coach. And I think, obviously, Coach Kirshner is the prime example that if we're not intentional about this, then we're not going to reach our full potential, and we're not going to have as big of an impact. So we're, saying that same line, and we can provide you all the resources and all that stuff, but it's because you're going to have to sit down with these kids, whether it's a youth league who for 2 minutes before practice talks about the importance of responsibility and we're going to clean up the field and pick up our trash, or whether it's high school athletes dealing with unique socioeconomic problems. That is the key that is going to help us reach those people. And I just love Coach's comments about being open, about being vulnerable, and about being intentional about trying to get that done.
I will add something Andy just said. Our players, he talked about picking up trash, cleaning the field. Our players have to clean the game field every Friday or every Thursday night. We finish practice, we clean the game field. You're teaching them to take pride in their program, and the reason I started that is I read an article about the CEO of the Los Angeles Angels. He's walking down the street with a young executive he just hired, and the CEO steps off the curb and goes out in the street and picks up a piece of trash, and the young executive says, "What'd you do that for?" He goes, "This is my town and nobody throws trash on my town." You're teaching them, intentionally teaching them to take pride in something. There's no question it works.
Yeah, great. We are coming up to the top of the hour, but this has been a fantastic time, and I do want to open up the floor to any questions. I know that there's one in the chat box here, and I don't mean to prolong this, for another 30 or 45 minutes, but if anybody has a question, and if the two of you could answer it, maybe like a concise elevator response, that would be great. So if you wanted to unmute yourself, ask a question, please feel free to do. This is a good time with these two great minds in developing young people.
Yeah, I might ask a quick question. First of all, thanks, Joe, for organizing and that speech you just had there. Mike, was incredible. I just had a quick question about, if you had to, either yourself or Rick, if you had to sort of give one piece of advice to a coach on how to either build that coach-athlete trust, or to break down the wall, or anything along those lines, what would that one piece of advice be?
From my standpoint, it would be talk to them. Get them to open up. I really, when I really started doing that in 2011, prior to that, I would have one-on-one meetings with my players, but it would be, you know, let's set goals. What's your weight room goals? What's your play goals? I got rid of all that. When I sit down in my one-on-one meetings, it's tell me about yourself. Again, how much do I care? I really want to know, do you have brothers and sisters? What's it like at home? What do you want to do with yourself? What drives you? What gets you up in the morning? And then once I know that, I can build from that relationship-wise, as far as what makes them go, what triggers to push. Before, it was, if you played for me, it was, even if you were a girl basketball player. I remember getting called in by the head coach once saying, "Hey, the girls love you, but they think you're mad all the time," because I was just coaching hard all the time. Some kids can handle it, some can't, and that was another trigger that had to be learned. And it took a long time for me. I've got a kid by the name of Trevor playing for me. I know if I raise my voice, he's done for the day. So I can't. As much as I want to, it's, oh, hey, Trevor, come here, man. Let's talk about this. All right, coach, what'd I do wrong? That's his answer. You know, so one-on-one, but really ask them to talk about them. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, Mike Jennings. Go ahead, Andy.
I would build off that really quickly. And I think, you know, people say that coaches, you have to set the model. So it's always fair to ask the coaches, how open, how honest, and how vulnerable are we being, if that's what we want out of our players? You know, if the coaches need to lead the way and live the example, are we doing those same things? And I know it can be difficult in sport with the age dynamics and power dynamics, but I think we have to find a way to show them that that's kind of what this program is about.
Great, yeah. Mike Jennings, you want to unmute yourself and ask this question, because I think it's a really good question.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm thinking about in hearing these types of things is, I always am trying to approach it from an entire team perspective, right? Just like you two are. And my question is, do you find that kind of having this open approach with your coaches and the coach to player interaction and the player to player interaction, do you find that open approach bridges any gaps that there might be between socioeconomic backgrounds of your players? So, you know, the underprivileged versus the privileged, or the, you know, low income versus the rich, and, you know, whatever. Yeah, because I come from a school that had both ends of the spectrum, you know, executive families, homeless families, you know, and so, and sometimes it was hard. I found it hard to build that team atmosphere, because there were times where they just wouldn't, the players wouldn't understand where the players were coming from, let alone the coaches. So do you find that this open kind of dialogue and this open approach helps bridge those gaps?
There's no question. It absolutely does. And to add to that, by players hearing what other players have or don't have, allowed them to communicate better with each other. Some players realized they weren't the only ones not getting full meals at night. Some players that had things were now saying, wow, I didn't realize it was like that. How can I help you? And then I even had players go home and talk to their parents of well-to-do players, and would come back and say, hey, my son came home and said this, how can we help? Well, now I had a community of people helping me to make sure everybody was taken care of. Like when I was at Ben Davis, we'd take them to a football camp as a way of us just getting away for a while, but it was $250 a kid. I used to struggle to get the money for everybody. Then all of a sudden that happened, and the wealthy parents are saying, well, I'll pay for 3 of them. Just I'll write a check for $1,000 and I'll pay for, and all of a sudden it brought everybody closer together. And it didn't, my fear always was if I let everybody in, then they're going to think they can talk to me about playing time and all that. None of that really happened. We still kept that player to coach ratio or player to parent, never really became a factor. And so our overall team bonding became huge at that point.
Good. So yeah, let's wrap up and let's just do an elevator ride summary here. So been a great session, a lot of good discussion on developing the whole person and young athlete. But if you wanted to say in an elevator ride, a summary statement of, developing the whole person through sport, what would that message be?
I guess I'll go first here. I think it's just, we have to take everything into consideration and we have to be intentional about our actions. If we can't reach a youngster, no matter what the sport, no matter what the situation, no matter what the sex or age, if we can't reach the athlete with the relationship, we're not going to be able to teach any of the things we want to teach. That means we're not going to be able to get the most out of them physically, which is going to maximize their technical skills, which allows them to play tactically very well and become the best athlete. And there's going to be a roadblock up when it comes to teaching the lifestyle, the leadership, the humanity side that we want to do. So everything starts with building relationships, because that allows us to get into our 4 coactives. That allows us to follow the research and the curriculums and the background. So it's all intertwined and it's all important. And if we spend all of our time focusing on technical tactical, which coaches certainly love to do, we'll find ourselves ultimately hitting a roadblock way earlier than we should have, because we aren't able to capitalize on our knowledge, because our teaching and relationships will suffer.
Good. Coach, what do you have for us on our little elevator ride here?
Well, real quick, it really comes down to loving your players. I really believe that. I've gone out of my way to change my way of thinking and how I respond to kids and how I respond to people. The ability to build relationships. I get asked the question all the time, how do you get so many kids to be in your program? How'd you get 240 at Ben Davis and now you've got 120 and climbing at Mount Vernon? Because I think our coaches do a really good job of making everybody feel part of it. The last player on your bench is as important as the first player on your bench. We forget it. We sometimes look at that last player. I got a young man by the name of Blake. He can't walk and chew gum at the same time, but he texts me every day and tells me what his workout is. He tells me how much he's running, how much he's lifting, and he can't walk and chew gum. And I answer him. I don't answer him and say thanks. I say, Blake, doing all right? What's your body weight today? Again, a little bit of communication goes a long way. And I'm just going to go back to the same thing. Love them to death, man. I really believe that.
Yeah, good. Thanks for sharing that. I'm going to have my colleague Rick Howard jump in here as well, because Rick talks a lot about the wellness wheel. And I think a lot of what was discussed today revolves around this wellness wheel, no pun intended. But Rick, maybe just share a little bit of your thoughts related to that question, like a summary and how this links into the wellness wheel as well.
Joe, I really appreciate that opportunity, and thanks to both of you today. This has been fantastic and eye-opening for a lot of coaches and things they really need to hear, because it does go well beyond the X's and O's and the reps and sets. And I think we need to remember that always. with the wellness wheels, and it sounds like one of those kumbaya kind of a things, doesn't it? Where you're talking about all these different parameters, not just the physical, but the mental, the emotional, the social, the economic. All of these factors have a huge impact on kids, coaches, and all of us. So to hear from you what you're talking about here has been a fantastic revelation for me to see that it actually does happen. And there are areas where this is being implemented, and you can see the success of it when it's really looked at in the right way. Joe, do you want to ask a question about that, or you just want to have a wrap-up comment?
Yeah, just getting your thoughts around that idea, because I think
appreciate
I just think it really ties into everything that was discussed
Yeah.
today with
Yep.
developing the whole person. And I want to thank, Coach, you and Andy for being on today. Relatively smaller live audience than we've had in the past. I think people are getting zoomed out a little bit, but I can guarantee you that people are going to log in and they are going to watch this no matter what sport they're in. And they may not even be in a sport, because this transcends to all humans. This is a really good session, very powerful messages from both of you. I think both of you, is great to reunite with both of you as well. It's been quite some time since we've seen each other face to face. And I just want to remind everybody that we are recording. I'm going to drop the link in the chat box right now. It'll be tweeted out as well, but we're posting everything on the back end of my personal website for now, LTADchat Live. We also do the LTAD chats via Twitter. The next one will be the first week of May, and we're going to focus on dealing with parents. And I say dealing with parents tongue in cheek, because the person who's going to host actually has an organization called Working with Sport Parents. And we need to change that as well. And Coach kind of brought up bringing in parents to the program as well, which is so key. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Other upcoming LTAD chat lives this Saturday. We're going to focus on coaching females, because so many times we get male centric in terms of what we think about in terms of training and coaching, young people. So we're going to have an episode on coaching females. We have 3 great coaches who are going to be joining us on Saturday. Saturday, May 2nd, we're going to talk about training load in youth athletes, and how to assess and monitor training load, so that we can optimize performance and reduce the risk of injury, and keep health and well-being of these young people at the center of our youth athletic development models. You can also follow along with what we're doing on the National Strength and Conditioning Association Facebook page. Always posting updates there. There's a lot of interactive discussion around these topics on that Facebook page as well. So again, I thank everybody for joining us today, and hearing the experiences of these 2 great leaders in American football that really takes us from flag to Friday night, and most importantly, beyond. So again, thanks to everybody. Coach, thank you very much. It was great to hear your message again today. Andy, it was great to connect. Keep doing great stuff at USA Football and leading the charge there.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite.
Awesome. All right. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you, Joe. Good job.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
everyone.
Very good. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank
Joe,
you. Okay. Cheers.